The knocking in the night. The story I'm about to tell you is completely true. I've kept it to myself for years, telling only my closest friends, and even then only after several drinks. I'm not sharing this for attention or clicks. I honestly wish none of it had happened. The most terrifying part wasn't the mummified body behind the door. It was what it left behind in my life, what continues to this day. So consider this a warning as much as a story. My name is Marcus Reyes. 3 years ago, I was working at a convenience store in El Barrio Antiguo, the old quarter of Monterrey, Mexico. It's one of those neighborhoods that's charming during the day, colonial buildings, with peeling paint and bright colors, narrow cobblestone streets, old ladies selling handmade crafts to tourists. But at night, after the cafes close and the street performers go home, it transforms completely. The shadows deepen between buildings. The winding streets become confusing mazes. And the silence, that heavy watching silence that makes you feel like you're the only living soul for miles, even though you know thousands of people are sleeping behind those weathered walls. I was struggling financially then. My girlfriend Lucia had broken up with me 2 months earlier, leaving me alone in an apartment I could barely afford. The store manager had offered me extra shifts doing monthly inventory, and I couldn't afford to say no. These inventory nights were brutal, counting every single item in the store, reconciling the numbers, sometimes staying until 2 a.m. or later. But the overtime pay was the only thing keeping me from being evicted. That night, October 15th, had been particularly long. A shipment had arrived late, adding hours to the count. By the time I locked up the store, it was almost 1:30 a.m., and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. I trudged up the stairs to my second-floor apartment, keys jingling in the quiet hallway. When I opened the door, Blackie was there, waiting, dancing in circles with barely contained excitement. He was a medium-sized mutt, pure black, except for a small white patch on his chest. I'd found him 3 years earlier, a rain-soaked puppy huddled in a cardboard box during a thunderstorm. The vet had guessed he was some mix of Labrador and who knows what, but his breed didn't matter. He was my companion, my friend, especially now that Lucia was gone. "Sorry, boy," I whispered, dropping my backpack by the door. "Long night?" Blackie whined, pressing his nose against my leg, then trotting to the door with meaningful glances back at me. I'd completely forgotten to take him out before leaving for work that morning. The poor dog had been holding it in for over 12 hours. "Oh man, I'm the worst," I groaned, grabbing his leash from the hook. "Come on, quick walk and then sleep, I promise." The digital clock on the microwave flashed 1:42 a.m. as we headed out. Even in my exhausted state, I registered the time with a strange clarity, as if some part of me knew it would matter later. Outside, the October night was unseasonably cold. A full moon hung above the buildings, impossibly large and bright, casting everything in a silvery light that made familiar corners look alien. The streets were empty except for a lone taxi crawling along a distant avenue, its yellow light winking like a solitary firefly. Blackie tugged at his leash, immediately relieved himself against the building's wall, then surprised me by pulling harder, clearly wanting to continue walking. "Just a quick one, okay?" I mumbled, too tired to argue. We usually followed the same route for our night walks, down the main street, around the small park, and back through a quieter residential street. Safe, well-lit, predictable. But that night, Blackie had other ideas. He kept pulling toward a side street we rarely took, straining against his leash with uncharacteristic insistence. "Blackie, come on." I tugged back, but he whined and pulled harder. I was too exhausted to fight him, so I relented, following him down Calle Obregón. It was one of those streets that had been left behind during the neighborhood's partial renovation. Narrower than the main avenues, darker, with buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched since the 1940s. The street lamps here were spaced farther apart, their yellow light flickering weakly, barely penetrating the dense shadows between them. The smell of the street hit me immediately, a mixture of dampness, old garbage, forgotten in corners, and the faint metallic scent of rust. The buildings loomed on either side, their facades crumbling in places, covered in peeling paint and faded graffiti. Most windows were dark, with only the occasional blue glow of a television betraying signs of life. As we walked, I became increasingly aware of the sound of our footsteps, mine dragging with fatigue and Blackie's nails clicking rhythmically on the concrete. The silence between these sounds felt heavy, oppressive. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, my skin prickling despite the cool night air. I kept looking over my shoulder, seeing nothing but empty street stretching behind us. "Let's head back soon, boy," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. But Blackie wasn't listening. Halfway down the street, he suddenly stopped, going completely rigid. His ears perked forward, his head tilted slightly as if he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "What is it?" I asked, instinctively lowering my voice. He was staring fixedly at a house across the street, a 2-story building with walls that might once have been blue but were now a faded, peeling gray-blue in the moonlight. The upper-floor windows were boarded up with planks of wood, and the main entrance, a metal gate, also painted blue, was covered in rust spots and graffiti. Nothing about it looked different from dozens of other abandoned houses in the area, the kind left behind when families moved to newer neighborhoods. I was about to tug Blackie along when I heard it. A loud, metallic bang like someone hitting the metal gate from the inside. I froze, my heart immediately pounding. Then came another bang, and another, the metal gate shuddering with each impact. It was as if someone was desperately trying to get out, throwing their body against the door with increasing force. Blackie began barking, not his usual alert bark, but a high-pitched, frightened sound. The fur along his spine stood straight up, and he pulled back on his leash, trying to retreat. "Shh, shh." I tried to quiet him, though my own pulse was racing. Who could be inside an abandoned house? A squatter, someone trapped. The banging paused momentarily, then resumed with greater intensity, the sound echoing down the empty street. And then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice, a woman's voice, calling out, ayúdame, por favor." Help me, please help me. It wasn't an ordinary cry for help. There was a quality to it that felt wrong, a desperation that went beyond normal fear, a ragged edge that spoke of something primal and terrifying. This wasn't someone locked out of their house or a homeless person seeking shelter. This was pure terror. I looked around, hoping to see someone else, anyone who might have heard the cries too, but the street remained deserted. No, wait. There was a movement at a window above me. I looked up to see an elderly man peering down his face, half hidden in shadow. Our eyes met, and he spoke, his voice dry and emotionless. "Ahi no vive nadi." Nobody lives there. With that, he withdrew, closing his shutters with a soft click. I stood frozen, confused. If nobody lived there who was crying for help, I looked back at the blue gate, which had momentarily stopped shaking. The voice had gone quiet too. Had I imagined it all? Was I so tired that my mind was playing tricks on me? As if in answer, the banging resumed louder than before. The metal gate rattled violently on its hinges, and the woman's voice returned her cries, more desperate, more agonized. "Por favor, estoy atrapada. Ayúdame. Please, I'm trapped. Help me. I noticed other windows lighting up along the street." Neighbors awakened by the noise, peering out briefly before drawing their curtains closed, as if this was a disturbance they recognized and chose to ignore. My heart was hammering now. Something was very wrong here. I fumbled for my phone, intending to call the police, only to find it unresponsive. The battery had died during my long shift. "Damn it," I muttered, looking around for help. But the neighbors had all retreated, their windows dark once more. The only light came from the moon and the distant flickering street lamps. The banging on the gate became more rhythmic, more deliberate, as if whoever, whatever was inside knew they had my attention now. The cries changed too, becoming somehow more personal. "Marcus, ayude Marcus. Marcus, help me." Marcus, a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. How did she know my name? I'd never spoken it aloud. Blackie whined, pulling harder at the leash, trying to drag me away from the house. His instincts were screaming danger, but I couldn't just leave. What if someone was genuinely trapped? What if they were hurt? I took a hesitant step toward the gate, and immediately the banging stopped. The silence was sudden and complete, not even an echo remaining. I paused, confused. Another step forward, and still nothing. It was as if whatever had been making the noise was listening, watching, waiting. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Do you need help?" No response. The street was silent except for Blackie's low growling. I took another step back, and instantly the banging resumed, the voice calling out again, this time with a note of anger mixed with the desperation. "No te vayas, por favor, no me dejes aquí. Don't go, please don't leave me here." This bizarre interaction, the noise stopping when I approached, starting when I retreated, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cool night air. It felt deliberate, intelligent. It felt like a trap. I backed away further, tugging Blackie with me. The banging grew louder, more frantic, the metal gate visibly shaking now. The woman's cries became sobs, ragged and broken, but I kept backing away. Something deep inside me, some primal instinct for self-preservation, was screaming that I shouldn't approach that gate, that I should turn and run as fast as I could. We retreated to what felt like a safe distance, and I debated what to do. I couldn't just walk away. What if someone really was in danger? But I also couldn't open that gate myself. The nearest police station was about 15 minutes away on foot. I could go there and report what I'd heard. But as I was considering this option, I noticed a pole at the corner with a panic button, one of those emergency call boxes the city had installed in an attempt to reduce crime rates. I hurried over to it, pressed the button, and waited, heart pounding. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a couple of minutes, a patrol car appeared at the end of the street, moving slowly with its lights flashing but siren off. It came to a stop near us, and two officers stepped out. A middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a younger woman with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. "You called about someone trapped?" the male officer asked, approaching us cautiously. I nodded and pointed to the blue house. "There's someone inside, a woman. She's been calling for help, trying to get out." Both officers looked at the house, which was now completely silent. The banging had stopped the moment their car had appeared. "Are you sure, senor?" the female officer asked, skepticism evident in her tone. "That house has been abandoned for years." "I'm positive," I insisted. "She was banging on the gate, screaming for help. Ask any of the neighbors, they heard it too." The male officer, his nameplate read Rodriguez, exchanged a glance with his partner, then nodded. "We'll check it out. Stay here, please." They approached the house cautiously, hands resting on their holstered weapons. Officer Rodriguez knocked on the metal gate. "Police, is anyone in there?" Silence. He knocked again, louder. "If someone is inside, speak now." Nothing. The house remained still and dark. Blackie, who had calmed somewhat with the arrival of the police, suddenly became agitated again. He began barking furiously at the gate, pulling toward it despite his earlier fear. The fur on his back stood up and he bared his teeth, growling between barks. And then, as if responding to Blackie's challenge, the gate began to shake violently once more. The metal rattled in its frame, the sound piercing the quiet night. Both officers stepped back, drawing their weapons. "Ayúdame, no puedo abrir la puerta, estoy atrapada." "Help me, I can't open the door, I'm trapped." The woman's voice rang out clear and desperate. "Señora, we cannot break down the door without just cause." Officer Rodriguez called out. "Can you open it? Is someone holding you against your will?" "No puedo la puerta. Está bloqueada." "I can't, the door. It's blocked." The officers exchanged concerned looks. Without clear evidence of kidnapping or violence, they had no legal grounds to force entry. The female officer, Rivera, according to her badge, looked frustrated. And then something strange happened. From under the gate, a metal key slid out onto the sidewalk, gleaming in the moonlight. It was an old-fashioned key, the kind you might see in antique shops, with a small spot of what looked like red nail polish on its head. The moment the key appeared, the banging stopped. The voice went silent. An unnatural stillness descended on the scene, as if the entire street was holding its breath. Blackie had stopped barking too. He was now whimpering softly, tugging at the leash, clearly wanting to leave. Officer Rivera bent down and picked up the key, turning it over in her hands with a hesitant expression, as if unsure whether to use it. If someone was trapped inside, why did they have a key? And if they had a key, why couldn't they open the door themselves? Finally, with a nod from her partner, she inserted the key into the lock and turned it. There was a grinding sound of metal against metal, and the blue gate swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. I felt a sudden chill, an overwhelming urge to run, to get as far away from that open doorway as possible. But curiosity held me in place, a morbid need to know what was behind that door. The officers' flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow hallway covered in debris and dust. The walls were stained with water damage and peeling paint. The smell that wafted out was dense and oppressive, a mixture of mildew rot and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. Officer Rodriguez entered first, gun still drawn, with Rivera close behind. I remained at a safe distance, holding Blackie's leash tight as he continued to whimper. "No one's here," Rivera called back after a moment, her voice echoing strangely in the empty space. "I swear I heard," I began, but was interrupted by Rodriguez's voice from deeper inside. "Rivera, come look at this." The female officer hurried further in, following her partner's voice. I stood there uncertain for several moments. Then, against my better judgment, I tied Blackie's leash to a nearby lamppost and approached the open gate. "I'll be right back, boy," I promised, though Blackie's distressed whines made it clear he didn't want me anywhere near that house. I stepped through the doorway, carefully avoiding broken glass and debris on the floor. The hallway was narrow, leading to what must have once been a living room. The officers' flashlights created long, dancing shadows on the bare walls. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out more details. The ceiling was partially collapsed in places, exposing wooden beams. The floor was concrete, cracked and stained. It looked like no one had lived here for decades. I found the officers standing in front of the opposite wall, their flashlights pointed at something. Rodriguez noticed me and gestured for me to approach. "Sir, you might want to see this," he said, his voice strangely subdued. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw what they were looking at, and my world shifted permanently on its axis. Attached to the inside of the front door, the metal gate I'd been hearing bang all this time, was a body. Not a fresh corpse, but something that had been there for a very long time. The skin had dried and contracted around the bones, dark brown, like old leather stretched taut across a skeletal frame. Long black hair still clung to the skull. The clothing, what remained of it, hung in tatters from the desiccated form. But the most horrifying aspect was the position. The body had been tied to the door with ropes and old electrical cords, arms spread wide and secured to the horizontal bars as if crucified. The head was thrown back, the mouth open in an eternal, silent scream, and in the chest, where the heart should have been, was a large, hollow cavity, the edges dried and darkened, as if something had been violently carved out. I couldn't help it, I screamed. The sound echoed through the empty house, mingling with Blackie's renewed barking from outside. I stumbled backward, nearly falling as my legs threatened to give way beneath me. "Dios mío," Officer Rivera whispered, making the sign of the cross automatically. Rodriguez was already on his radio. "This is Rodriguez Unit 34. We need backup at 237 Calle Obregón. Body found. Repeat, body found. Need forensics and crime scene unit." I felt lightheaded, nauseated. I leaned against the wall for support, unable to tear my eyes from the mummified corpse. How was this possible? I had heard her voice just minutes ago, clear, desperate, alive. But the body tied to the door had clearly been dead for years, decades, even reduced to a natural mummy by time and the environment. "You should go outside," Rivera said to me, her voice gentle but firm. "This is a crime scene. We'll need your statement later." I nodded, too shocked to speak. I staggered back toward the entrance, carefully avoiding looking at the mummified body again. When I got outside, Blackie rushed to me, whining and licking my hands as if trying to comfort me or erase the horror I'd just witnessed. I sat down on the curb, holding Blackie close, simply breathing. My mind was still reeling from what I'd seen. I couldn't reconcile the voice I'd heard, the desperate pleas for help, with the long, dead corpse attached to that door. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. Within 15 minutes, the quiet street had transformed into a hub of activity. More police cars arrived, followed by an ambulance, though it was clearly too late for anyone to be saved. Yellow crime scene tape was stretched around the house, and officers began knocking on neighbors' doors, gathering information. A young officer approached me with a notebook. "You're the one who discovered the body, sir." I nodded, still finding it difficult to speak. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" I recounted everything: my late-night dog walk, hearing the banging and cries for help, calling the police. As I spoke, I could see the skepticism growing in the young officer's eyes. "And you're certain you heard a voice?" "A woman's voice coming from inside the house." "Yes," I insisted, though I could hear how crazy it sounded. "Officers Rodriguez and Rivera heard it too, right before the key slid out." He made notes, clearly unconvinced. "And you hadn't been drinking tonight, sir? Taking any medication?" "No, I was working late doing inventory at the store." "I was tired, but I know what I heard." My voice rose with frustration. I knew how it looked. Exhausted man imagines voices coming from a house containing a decades-old corpse. But I wasn't crazy, and I hadn't imagined it. As we talked, a white van with forensic services printed on the side pulled up. A man and woman in white coats stepped out carrying equipment cases. "That's quite a strange case," I overheard the man say as they passed me. "A natural mummy in the middle of the city. Not something we see every day." As I led Blackie away, I noticed more neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves. An elderly woman was softly crying into the shoulder of a younger man, perhaps her son. An old man was shaking his head, muttering something about "La maldición de la Casa Azul," the curse of the blue house. On the walk home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Who was that woman? How did she end up like that? And most importantly, how could I have heard her voice, her cries for help, when she had clearly been dead for many years? When I called my girlfriend's name as I reached for the key that slid out, I felt something brush against the back of my neck. A cold breath, perhaps, or just my imagination working overtime in the tension of the moment. But there was something else, something I hadn't told the police because it sounded too insane, too impossible. When I bent down to look at that key, I could have sworn I saw a faint reflection in its polished surface. Not my own face, but that of a woman, her features contorted in a silent scream, identical to the mummified corpse we would discover moments later. That was my first encounter with Elena Vasquez, but it wouldn't be my last. What I didn't know then, standing in that street with the full moon overhead and the taste of fear metallic in my mouth, was that by hearing her cries, by witnessing her tragic end, I had somehow opened a door between worlds. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The inexplicable cry for help. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mummified face frozen in a silent scream, the hollow cavity where a heart should have been. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, Blackie curled protectively against my side, jumping at every creak and settling of the old building. By the time dawn broke, casting pale fingers of light through my blinds, I looked like I'd aged 5 years. When my phone finally charged enough to turn on, it exploded with notifications, 3 missed calls from my boss wondering why I hadn't shown up for my morning shift, news alerts about a gruesome discovery in El Barrio, Antiguo, and a text from an unknown number, "You shouldn't have opened the door." I stared at that message for a long time, my hand trembling. I tried calling back, but a robotic voice informed me the number didn't exist. I deleted it immediately, telling myself it was probably a wrong number, a coincidence. I didn't believe it, but I needed to. The police called around noon, asking me to come to the station to give a formal statement. The detective who interviewed me, a tired-looking man named Morales with deep circles under his eyes, listened carefully as I recounted everything, his pen scratching across his notepad. When I got to the part about hearing the woman's voice, his writing slowed and he glanced up with an expression I was beginning to recognize, polite skepticism bordering on concern for my mental state. "And you say Officers Rodriguez and Rivera heard the voice too?" he asked. "Yes, after they arrived. They both heard it," I insisted. This was my lifeline to credibility. I wasn't the only witness. Detective Morales made another note. "I'll check their report. Now about the key. It slid out from under the door, just appeared. And you didn't touch it?" "No. Officer Rivera picked it up." He nodded, writing something else. "According to preliminary forensics, the body has been there for approximately 40 years. A female, late 20s, cause of death appears to be—" He hesitated, checking his notes. "Exsanguination from a chest wound. They're still working on identification. 40 years. The woman had been dead since before I was born. Yet I'd heard her voice as clearly as I was hearing Detective Morales now." "Am I a suspect?" I asked, the thought suddenly occurring to me. He gave me a tired smile. "No, Mr. Reyes. Unless you were committing murders before you were born, you're not a suspect. We're treating this as a cold case possibly linked to several disappearances from the early 1980s. Your statement is helpful, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. But they didn't believe the part about the voice, the key sliding out on its own. The impossible parts. I left the police station feeling both relieved and unsettled. No one thought I was a killer, but they clearly thought I was either lying or hallucinating. I wasn't sure which was worse. The story made the front page of every local newspaper. "Mummy found in abandoned house," the headline screamed. Most articles focused on the sensational aspects, the preserved state of the body, the bizarre position tied to the door, the missing heart. A few mentioned an anonymous tip that led police to the discovery, but none included the details about the voice, the banging the key appearing as if by magic. Those elements were too fantastic, too unbelievable for serious journalism. I called in sick to work for the next 3 days, unable to face people, unable to sleep more than an hour or two at a time. Blackie stayed close, watching me with worried eyes, whining softly whenever I jerked awake from half-formed nightmares. I kept the TV on, constantly unable to bear silence, ordering delivery food that I barely touched. The only times I left the apartment were to take Blackie on brief, nervous walks, sticking to well-lit main streets and returning before dark. On the 4th day, I forced myself to return to work. My boss, a practical man named Hernandez, who'd owned the store for 20 years, raised an eyebrow at my haggard appearance, but seemed satisfied with my mumbled explanation of a bad stomach virus. The familiar routine of stocking shelves, running the register, and helping customers provided a welcome distraction. For a few hours, I could almost pretend that night had never happened. Until a customer came in around 6 p.m., an elderly man with wispy white hair and deeply sunken eyes. I recognized him immediately, the neighbor who had watched from his window, who had told me, "Nobody lives there." He shuffled through the aisles, picking up a loaf of bread and a small carton of milk, then approached the register. As I rang up his items, our eyes met, and he spoke in a low voice. "You heard her, didn't you, La Encerrada?" My hands froze over the register. "The who?" "The trapped one, that's what we call her. The woman behind the door." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of tobacco and coffee. "She chooses who can hear her. She's been waiting for someone to find her." I felt a chill spread through my body despite the store's warmth. "What do you mean she chooses? She's been dead for decades." He nodded solemnly. "Her body, yes, but her spirit has been trapped there all this time, bound to the place of her death." He placed exact change on the counter. "My name is Miguel Ortiz. I've lived on that street for 67 years. I've seen things. Heard things." He slid a folded piece of paper toward me. "If you want to know more, come to this address, but only if you're ready for the truth." Before I could respond, he gathered his purchases and shuffled out the bell above the door, tinkling cheerfully in his wake, incongruous with the dread pooling in my stomach. I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, an address on Calle San Juan, not far from the Blue House, and a time 9 p.m. "You okay?" Hernandez asked from where he was restocking cigarettes. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied, pocketing the paper. "Just still a little under the weather." The rest of my shift passed in a blur of anxiety. Part of me wanted to throw away the old man's address, to walk away from the whole bizarre situation. But a deeper part knew I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had happened that night, why I had heard a dead woman's voice calling my name, how a key had magically appeared under a door. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. After work, I went home to feed Blackie and take him for a quick walk. As 9 p.m. approached, I wrestled with indecision. Going to a stranger's house at night, especially one connected to this nightmarish situation, seemed like exactly the kind of decision people make in horror movies right before they're brutally murdered. But staying home continuing to jump at shadows and wake up screaming wasn't sustainable either. In the end, curiosity and desperation won out. I left Blackie with extra food and water, promising to return soon. As I locked my apartment door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. Miguel Ortiz lived in a small apartment in an old building with peeling paint and a broken elevator. I climbed 3 flights of stairs, heart pounding more from anxiety than exertion, and knocked softly on apartment 3C. The door opened immediately, as if he'd been waiting just on the other side. Miguel gestured me in with a gnarled hand. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." His apartment was small but clean, furnished with worn pieces that might have been stylish in the 1970s. Family photos in black and white frames lined the walls. A small TV murmured in the corner, the volume turned low. Sit," he said, pointing to a plastic-covered sofa. "I'll make coffee." I sat awkwardly while he shuffled into the kitchen. I could hear him moving around the clink of cups, the gurgle of a coffee maker. When he returned, he carried 2 steaming mugs and placed one in front of me. "My name is Miguel Ortiz," he introduced himself formally. "I have lived in El Barrio Antiguo for 67 years. I have seen things change, things happen in this neighborhood." He sipped his coffee. "Including what happened to Elena Vasquez." "Elena Vasquez," I repeated. "Is that the woman in the house?" He nodded. "I didn't know her personally, but I remember when she disappeared." It was a terrifying time. Many women disappeared. People were afraid. He looked out the window toward where the Blue House would be. "And then one night we heard the scream. From the house," I leaned forward, another nod. "A woman's scream. So painful, so desperate. We all heard it, but nobody dared to do anything." "Why not?" I couldn't believe it. "Why not call the police?" Miguel looked at me with sad eyes. "You don't understand. It was a different time. We didn't trust the police. And the Mendoza family, they had power. Everyone knew Javier Mendoza was involved in the disappearances, but nobody dared to speak out. And then on the night we heard the scream, the lights in their house stayed on all night. By morning they were gone, all of them. No one ever saw them again." "And nobody checked the house?" I asked, incredulous. "The police came, but they only looked superficially. The house was locked and they had no search warrant, no evidence of a crime." "Nobody could prove anything," he sighed. "And then the rumors started. People said they could hear her, Elena, on certain nights, the banging on the door, the cries for help, but only on certain nights and only to certain people." "What nights?" I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. "Full moon nights," Miguel said. "The last night she was alive was during a full moon." "And the night you found her also a full moon, yes?" I nodded, feeling another chill. I remembered seeing that impossibly large moon hanging above the buildings as Blackie and I had set out on our walk. But why me? I wondered aloud. Why did she choose me? Miguel studied me for a moment as if deciding whether I was worthy of the truth. There is an old story of belief in our culture. When a person dies violently, especially when they are a victim of a ritual, their soul becomes trapped between worlds. They cannot move on, cannot find peace. He sipped his coffee. They say such a soul will seek out a living person, someone who can help them find justice, or at least be properly laid to rest. They will choose someone with a gift, someone who can see and hear things others cannot. I shook my head. I don't have any gift. I'm just a normal convenience store manager. I don't believe in these things. And your dog? He sensed something first, didn't he? Miguel asked. He led you there. He knew. Animals always know. I couldn't deny that. Blackie had acted strangely that night, pulling me down Calle Obregon, a street we rarely visited. I don't understand the purpose of all this, I said. She's been found now. They'll bury her properly. She can rest in peace. Miguel gave me a strange look. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's not over. Perhaps she still needs you. Needs me for what? I asked, feeling uneasy. To find justice, he said simply. To find her heart. I stared at him. Her heart. It was cut out, wasn't it? A hole in her chest. He shook his head. That's not a coincidence. Javier Mendoza, he followed an old cult. A cult that required sacrifice. He believed that by taking the hearts of young women, he could extend his own life, increase his power. He sighed. But with Elena, something went wrong. She fought. She was trapped behind the door, tied to it, and he cut out her heart while she was still alive. But instead of performing the ritual, he had to flee, and her soul remained trapped there, bound to the door, unable to rest until her heart is found and buried with the rest of her. I felt nauseated. This couldn't be real. This was the stuff of nightmares, of horror movies, not real life. How would I even find her heart? I asked, partly to humor him, partly because I couldn't help myself. It's been 40 years. Javier Mendoza could be anywhere if he's still alive. He's still alive, Miguel said with a certainty that surprised me. I see him in the papers sometimes. He changed his name, changed his appearance, but I know it's him. He's now a successful businessman in the north. Wealthy, powerful. He lives in a large mansion in San Pedro Garza Garcia. And I bet Elena's heart is still there, preserved as a trophy. I looked at Miguel, unsure if he was in his right mind or had slipped into delusion. And you want me to do what, break into a wealthy businessman's mansion and search for a heart that was removed 40 years ago? Miguel shrugged. I don't know. I only know that she chose you for a reason. And if you don't complete this task, she will never leave you in peace. I set my coffee cup down and stood up. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Ortiz, and for the information. But I think I'll leave this matter to the police. Miguel also stood nodding sadly. Of course, I understand. But when she comes back to you, and she will come back, remember what I've said. I left his apartment with a heavy feeling in my stomach. I didn't believe in the supernatural explanation he'd offered. I couldn't believe it. But as I walked home through streets that suddenly seemed full of shadows, I couldn't help but wonder, what if he was right? What if this wasn't over? The next morning I woke to find a bloody handprint on my bathroom mirror. It hadn't been there when I'd brushed my teeth before bed, I was certain of that. It was a small hand, a woman's hand, the fingers splayed as if pressed against the glass from the other side. I scrubbed it off with shaking hands, telling myself it must be a prank someone had broken in. It couldn't be what Miguel had suggested. But my apartment door had been locked and chained from the inside. All windows were closed and secured. And Blackie, usually so alert to any intrusion, had slept peacefully through the night. That night I dreamed of the blue house. In the dream, I stood outside the metal gate which swung open at my approach. I walked through against my will, drawn forward by an unseen force. The interior was different, not the abandoned ruin I'd seen, but a home dimly lit by candles with furniture draped in sheets like pale ghosts. At the end of the hallway stood a figure, a woman in a white dress, her back to me, long dark hair cascading down. As I approached, she slowly turned, revealing not a face, but a hollow void, black and endless. I jerked awake, gasping, to find my sheets soaked with sweat, and something clutched in my right hand, a small key with a spot of red on its head, identical to the one that had slid under the blue door. I dropped it with a cry, and it bounced on the floor with a metallic ping. Blackie, awakened by my shout, jumped off the bed and sniffed at it, growling low in his throat. When I worked up the courage to look again, the key was gone as if it had never been there at all. I began researching obsessively. During breaks at work after my shifts late into the night, I scoured old newspaper articles digitized from local papers. About the disappearances from the 1980s, about the Mendoza family, about Javier Mendoza, about heart sacrifice rituals. Most of what I found matched Miguel's story. There had indeed been a series of disappearances, 6 young women over 3 years. All were in their 20s, single, living alone. All vanished late at night, usually after work shifts, and except for one, none were ever found. The only victim ever recovered was Maria Delgado, a 25-year-old bank teller. Her body was found in a drainage ditch a week after she disappeared. According to the autopsy report, she had been killed by a deep incision to the chest, and her heart had been removed. The articles also mentioned strange symbols carved into her body, though no specific details were provided. About the Mendoza family, I found less information. Javier Mendoza had been a successful businessman owning a construction company. He had a wife, Lucia, and 2 sons, Carlos and Antonio. They had moved to 237 Calle Obregón in the early 1970s, and as Miguel had said, abruptly moved away in 1983, shortly after Elena disappeared. After this, their trail grew cold. No articles mentioned where they moved to what they did afterward. It was as if they had vanished from the face of the earth. But then I found a clue, an article from 1990 about a successful businessman named Javier Morales, who had built a real estate empire in San Pedro Garza Garcia, the wealthy northern area Miguel had mentioned. The article included a photograph, and despite the poor quality, I could see a resemblance between this Javier Morales and Javier Mendoza from an old photo I'd found. Same deep-set eyes, same square jaw, same small scar on the left cheek. But Javier Morales had gray hair, while Mendoza had black, and though still considered middle-aged, he looked much older than his actual age should have been. I could find no information about Morales's wife or sons. The article described him as a bachelor living alone in a large mansion named Villa del Corazon Heart Mansion. Heart Mansion, I muttered to myself. That can't be a coincidence. I continued digging. Javier Morales had become one of the wealthiest men in the region, expanding his empire from real estate to other sectors, hotels, restaurants, even a chain of private hospitals called Corazon Sano, Healthy Heart. The article spoke of his philanthropy, of his donations to charities, of how respected he was in the community. But there were also whispers, rumors about his involvement in criminal activities, about business partners who disappeared after disagreements with him about young women, often employees of his companies, who were never seen again. The most recent article I found was from the previous year. Javier Morales, now 84 years old, was still running his empire. The article said he maintained remarkable health and mental acuity despite his advanced age. The accompanying photograph showed a man who looked much younger than 84, with thick gray hair and taut skin, with almost no wrinkles. Miguel was right, I whispered. He's still alive, and he still looks healthy. I didn't know what to do with this information. I couldn't just go to the police and say, I think this wealthy businessman killed Elena Vasquez 40 years ago and took her heart as part of a magical ritual. They would think I was insane. But I also couldn't ignore it. Not after the bloody handprint on my mirror. Not after the dream and the key. Not when I could still hear Elena's voice in my head, calling my name, begging for help. That night I laid awake staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do. Blackie was curled up beside me, snoring softly. The digital clock on my nightstand blinked 1:42 a.m., the exact time I had first set out on our walk that fateful night. As if triggered by the coincidence, I heard a soft tap on my bedroom window. I sat up, heart racing. My apartment was on the second floor with no balcony or fire escape outside my bedroom window. There couldn't be someone tapping, but the sound came again, gentle but persistent. Blackie woke up, 2 ears perked, a low growl building in his throat. Steeling myself, I got out of bed and approached the window. When I pulled back the curtain, I saw it, a handprint on the glass. A bloody handprint, small and delicate, a woman's hand. And it was on the outside of the window, 2 stories up, with no possible way for anyone to reach it. I stumbled backward with a cry of fear. Blackie began barking furiously, the fur on his back standing on end. When I looked at the window again, the handprint was gone. No trace remained on the clear glass. "I'm losing my mind," I whispered to myself. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. Something was happening to me, something beyond rational explanation. Elena Vasquez had reached out to me from beyond death, and she wouldn't stop until I helped her. The next day, I called in sick to work again. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't face people with the knowledge of what I had to do growing inside me like a tumor. Instead, I drove to San Pedro Garza Garcia. I needed to see Villa del Corazon for myself. I needed to see Javier Morales. It took about an hour to drive from El Barrio Antiguo to San Pedro Garza Garcia. As I crossed the city limits, I could immediately see the difference. The streets were wider, cleaner. The houses were better built with high walls and security systems. Luxury cars cruised past. This was a place for the wealthy, for the powerful. I had researched the address of Villa del Corazon online. It sat on a hill overlooking the city, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. There was a large gate at the front with guards. I knew I couldn't just drive up to the front gate, so I parked at a safe distance and walked to a vantage point where I could see the mansion but remain unobserved. I found a spot on an opposite hill with a few trees for cover. Looking through the binoculars I'd brought, I could see the mansion clearly. It was larger than I'd imagined, a veritable castle with multiple wings and towers. Built of white stone with red tile roofs, it looked like a palace from another world, another era. Around the main building were extensive gardens meticulously maintained with statues and fountains. And behind it all, a small forest provided a green backdrop. I didn't see much activity. A few gardeners working in the front area. A woman, perhaps a housekeeper, came out and spoke to them briefly, then went back inside. No sign of Javier Morales. I sat there for hours, watching, waiting. The sun moved across the sky and shadows lengthened. I was about to give up and head home when I saw a black limousine appear on the driveway leading to the mansion. The car stopped at the main entrance and the driver got out, walking around to open the back door. A man stepped out, tall, thin, with thick gray hair and a dark blue suit. Even from this distance I could tell it was Javier Morales. He didn't look like an 84-year-old man. He stood straight-moved with the agility of a much younger man. He said something to the driver, laughed, then walked into the house. I lowered my binoculars, feeling a chill run down my spine. Miguel had been right. Javier Morales, or Mendoza, looked unnaturally healthy for his age. Suddenly I felt watched. I looked around, half expecting to see a security guard or a dog, but there was nothing. Just the trees and the gathering dusk as the sun began to set. I decided it was time to leave. I'd seen enough. Javier Morales existed. He lived in Villa del Corazon, and he looked unnaturally healthy for his age. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something I didn't understand, something dangerous. But I also couldn't turn back. Not now. Not when I'd come this far. I was driving home, the night having fallen completely, when I felt something cold touch the back of my neck. I jerked, nearly swerving the car, and looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but the cold sensation remained, like fingers gently brushing against my skin. And then in the mirror I saw something that made my blood freeze. A woman's face, pale and gaunt with dark eyes and long black hair. She was sitting in the back seat, though there was no one physically there. Our eyes met in the mirror and her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. Find my heart. I nearly crashed the car, jerking the wheel in panic. When I managed to pull over and look back, the back seat was empty again. But on the leather upholstery was a single drop of something dark and red. With shaking hands, I reached back and touched it. It was wet, warm, blood. I drove home in a state of terror, constantly checking the rearview mirror, flinching at every shadow and sound. By the time I reached my apartment, I was a wreck, sweating and trembling. Blackie greeted me at the door, his usual enthusiastic welcome dampened by concern. He whined softly, pressing against my legs as if sensing my distress. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, though nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again until I did what Elena was asking of me. Until I found her heart. I spent the night researching more about Villa del Corazon, about Javier Morales' schedule, about heart sacrifice rituals. I learned that he attended charity events frequently, that security at his mansion was tight, but not impenetrable, that the upcoming full moon was in 3 days. As dawn broke, I made my decision. I would break into Villa del Corazon during the next charity event Morales was scheduled to attend. I would find Elena's heart. I would end this nightmare one way or another. What I didn't know then, as I finally fell into an exhausted sleep with Blackie keeping anxious watch beside me, was that someone else was already planning the same thing. Someone who had even more reason than I did to want justice for Elena Vasquez. Someone whose appearance would change everything. The heart that never stopped beating. The next morning I woke to find my apartment transformed. Every mirror in my home was covered in bloody handprints, as if someone had pressed their palms against the glass from the other side. Even the small decorative mirror in my hallway, the reflective door of my microwave, the chrome finish of my refrigerator, all marked with the same small feminine handprints. Blackie cowered in the corner of my bedroom, whining softly, refusing to look at the mirrors. I spent an hour scrubbing them clean, only to watch in horror as the handprints slowly reappeared, the blood seeping through the glass like ink through paper. "What do you want from me?" I shouted at my bathroom mirror, my voice cracking with fear and frustration. "What am I supposed to do?" As if in answer, the bloody handprints began to move, sliding across the glass to form letters. I watched frozen in place as a single word took shape: Corazon. Heart. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts, until I found Miguel Ortiz's number, which he'd given me before I left his apartment. He answered on the second ring. "You've seen more," he said. It wasn't a question. "She's everywhere," I whispered. "The mirrors, blood," she wrote heart. "She's growing stronger," Miguel replied, his voice grave. "The full moon is approaching. You need to find her heart before then." How? How am I supposed to break into a mansion with armed security and find a 40-year-old heart? "I don't know," he admitted. "But Elena does. She chose you for a reason. Listen to her." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bathtub, head in my hands. This was insanity. I couldn't break into Javier Morales' mansion. I couldn't find a heart that had been cut out 4 decades ago. I was a convenience store manager, not a cat burglar or a detective. And yet what choice did I have? The handprints on my mirrors, the voice calling my name, the dreams, they were all getting worse. Elena wouldn't stop until I did what she asked. And deep down, beneath the fear and disbelief, a part of me wanted justice for her. No one should die that way, tied to a door heart cut out while still alive. No one should be forgotten their killer living in luxury while their body rotted away behind a locked door. I called in sick to work again, ignoring my boss's thinly veiled threat about job security. None of that would matter if I couldn't end this haunting. I spent the day researching upcoming events, that Javier Morales would attend security systems for high-end properties, and anything else that might help me plan this impossible mission. As night fell, I found myself pacing, unable to sit still. The mirrors had stopped bleeding, but I could feel a presence in my apartment watching me from every corner. Blackie sensed it too, alternating between growling at empty spaces and hiding under the bed. Around midnight, a soft knock at my door made me jump. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway, tall, thin, with dark hair and a scar running from his right eye to his jaw. I didn't recognize him, and every instinct screamed danger. "Who is it?" I called through the door, one hand on my phone, ready to call the police. "My name is Carlos," he replied, his voice low and slightly accented. "Carlos Mendoza. We need to talk about my mother, Elena." I froze. Carlos Mendoza, Javier Mendoza's son, Elena's son. It couldn't be coincidence. Against my better judgment, I opened the door, leaving the security chain engaged. The man outside looked to be in his early 40s with intense dark eyes that immediately reminded me of the bloody face I'd seen in my rearview mirror. "How did you find me?" I demanded. "The same way you found my father," he said. "Research and other means." He glanced past me into my apartment. "May I come in? It's not safe to talk in the hallway." I hesitated, then unhooked the chain. If he had wanted to hurt me, he could have done so already. And if he was truly Elena's son, maybe he could help me understand what was happening. Carlos entered cautiously, his eyes scanning the room like someone accustomed to looking for threats. Blackie emerged from the bedroom, hackles raised, but after a moment of tense evaluation, he relaxed and approached Carlos, sniffing his hand curiously. "Dogs always know," Carlos murmured, patting Blackie's head gently. "They can sense things we can't." "You said Elena was your mother," I said, closing and locking the door. "How is that possible? She disappeared in 1983. You must be—" 43, he finished. "I was born in 1980. My father held my mother captive for 3 years before he killed her." The blunt statement chilled me. I gestured for Carlos to sit, and he took a seat on my worn couch, his posture tense alert. "My father met her at the hospital where she worked," he continued without prompting. "He was a patient, and she was the nurse who cared for him. He became obsessed with her beauty and gentleness. He learned about her, followed her, and then he brought her home." Carlos sighed, a sound heavy with decades of pain. "I was born 6 months later. I never really knew her. He kept her in the basement, hidden from everyone. But when I was little, I heard her, crying, singing lullabies. My mother was there, living in darkness, while my father told the world his wife had died giving birth to me." "I'm sorry," I said, inadequate words for such a horror. "Elena wasn't the first woman he took," Carlos continued, his voice hardening. "But she was the only one he kept. The others, Maria, Rosa, Luisa, Carmen, Beatriz, they were just sacrifices. But Elena was different. He loved her in his own sick way." "What happened in 1,983 inches, I asked. "Why did your family suddenly leave?" "Because Elena escaped," Carlos said. "She found a way out of the basement. She ran, but she didn't know where to go. She went back to the house hoping to find help, but my father followed. He caught her at the front door. And that's when he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one could." "He killed her," I whispered. "Tied her to the door and cut out her heart." Carlos nodded, his eyes darkening with pain. "He performed the ritual right there at the front door. He tied her to the door and cut out her heart while she was still alive. He did it in front of a 2-year-old child, his son, her son." His voice broke. "I remember it. Not all of it, but fragments. Her screams, the blood, the look in her eyes as life left her." "I'm so sorry," I said again, unable to find better words. "After that we left," Carlos continued. "My father, me, and Antonio, my half-brother's son from my father's previous wife. We moved north, changed our name to Morales. My father started over building his empire. And every year on the full moon of October, he performs a ritual with Elena's heart. He places it in a crystal vessel specially made for it and recites ancient incantations. And as long as the heart continues to beat, he lives, he stays young." "How can a heart beat after 40 years?" I asked, incredulous despite everything I'd experienced. "Black magic," Carlos said simply. "Not the kind you read about in books or see in movies. Real magic, ancient, magic that demands sacrifice, blood and souls." He looked at me intently. "But not all souls give up easily. Elena's still there in the blue house, bound to the place where she died. And now she has chosen you to help her." "Help her do what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Find her heart," Carlos said. "Destroy it. Only then will her soul be free, and only then will my father lose his power, lose his youth. He will become what he truly is, an 84-year-old man as weak and vulnerable as anyone else." "You want revenge," I said, and it wasn't a question. Carlos nodded. "He killed my mother. He took her heart and used it to extend his life. He deserves punishment." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why do you trust me?" "Because Elena trusts you," Carlos said. "She chose you. She led you to the blue house on the full moon night. She pushed the key under the door. She showed you." He looked at me with keen eyes. "And now she's contacting you again, isn't she? You've seen her signs." I thought about the bloody handprints on my mirrors, the face in my rearview mirror, the word written in blood, Corazon. "How do you know about that?" I asked. "I know my mother," Carlos said simply. "I know how she works. And I know that the full moon is coming again. That's when my father will perform the ritual. That's when we must find the heart and destroy it." "We," I repeated. "You want me to help you?" "I've been searching alone for years," Carlos said. "I've searched all over Villa del Corazon, but I found nothing. My father is too careful, too secretive. But now I think I know where it is, and I need your help to get it." "Where is it?" I asked. "In a sacred place," Carlos said. "A place my father believes will enhance the power of the ritual." He looked at me. "In the old chapel on the hill behind Villa del Corazon, in a secret chamber beneath the altar." I stared at him, uncertain whether to believe him. This could be a trap. Carlos could be working for his father, luring me into a scheme, or he could simply be delusional. But then I thought about Elena, about the mummified body tied to the door, about the voice calling my name, about the bloody handprints on my mirrors, and I knew I had no choice. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow night," Carlos said. "The full moon. My father will go to the chapel at midnight to perform the ritual. We must be there before him, find the heart, and destroy it before he arrives." "How do we destroy it?" I asked. Carlos looked at me with a grave expression. "We must burn it. It's the only way to be sure." I nodded, feeling a strange, new determination rising within me. "All right, I'll help you." Carlos handed me a piece of paper with a phone number written on it. "Call me tomorrow when you're ready. We'll meet at the foot of the hill." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "Do you have a gun?" "No," I said, feeling a chill. "I don't have a gun. No matter," Carlos said, though I could hear a hint of disappointment in his voice. "I'll bring one." "We won't need it, will we?" I asked, anxiety rising. "I mean, we just go in, find the heart, and get out right." "I hope so," Carlos said. "But my father might arrive early. Or he might have people watching the chapel. We need to be prepared for anything." After he left, I sat on my couch for a long time trying to process everything. I was about to break into a chapel, steal a beating heart, and destroy it. I was about to confront a man who had murdered multiple women and used black magic to extend his life. I was completely out of my depth and over my head in something I barely understood, but I also felt a strange sense of purpose. For the first time since I had heard Elena's voice on that moonlit night, I had a clear path forward. I would help her find peace. I would bring her justice. I slept fitfully that night, my dreams filled with images of beating hearts and bloody doors. I woke feeling both exhausted and wired, like I'd had too much coffee. The mirrors remained clean, no bloody handprints, no messages. But I could feel Elena's presence stronger than ever, waiting, watching, hoping. I spent the day preparing as best I could. I dressed in dark clothes, packed a small backpack with a flashlight, matches, and a lighter in case we needed to burn the heart quickly. I made sure my phone was fully charged, though I doubted it would be much use against a practitioner of black magic. As evening approached, I fed Blackie extra food and took him for a long walk, knowing it might be hours before I returned. If I returned at all. The thought sent a chill through me, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't think like that. I had to believe I would succeed, that this nightmare would end tonight. At 9 p.m. I called Carlos. "I'm ready," I said simply. "Meet me at the base of the hill in an hour," he replied. "And Marcus, leave your dog at home. He'll only draw attention." I agreed, though leaving Blackie behind felt like losing a protective talisman. He whined as I prepared to leave, sensing something was wrong. I knelt and hugged him tightly. "I'll be back soon, boy," I whispered, hoping it wasn't a lie. The drive to San Pedro Garza Garcia seemed to take both forever and no time at all. My mind raced with fears, doubts, and questions, but my body operated on autopilot, guiding the car through familiar streets toward the wealthy enclave. Carlos was waiting at our agreed meeting spot, a shadowy figure beneath a large oak tree. He wore a dark jacket with a hood pulled up, and I could see the slight bulge under his clothing that suggested a concealed weapon. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't sure you would." "I gave my word," I said simply. "We need to go up a trail to the chapel," Carlos said. "It will take us to the back where we're less likely to be seen." We began climbing the hill, following a narrow path through a small forest. The night was warm, the sky clear and filled with stars. The full moon hung above us, casting silvery light through the branches, enough to see our way without flashlights. As we climbed, Carlos told me more about his mother. About the vague memories he had of her, her lullabies, her scent, the feeling of her hand on his face. About how he had grown up with a cruel father and an indifferent half-brother, always feeling something was missing from his life. "When I was 18, I found a diary," he said, "hidden in my father's study. It belonged to Elena. She had written it during her captivity, writing about me, about her love for me, about her pain at not being able to be with me. And she wrote about what my father had done, the rituals, the murders, the black magic." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "That's when I knew, when I understood why I had always felt something was wrong, why I had always feared my father." "What did you do?" I asked. "I ran away," Carlos said. "I fled. I lived under a different name in a different country for many years. But I could never forget what I had read, and I could never forgive my father for what he had done. So eventually I came back to find my mother's heart, to free her soul, and to get revenge," I added. Not a question. Carlos looked at me, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "And to get revenge," he agreed. We continued climbing in silence after that. The trail grew steeper and our breathing became heavier. But finally we reached the top of the hill and the chapel came into view. It was a small stone building with a bell tower and narrow, high windows. In the moonlight it looked ancient and mysterious, like a relic from another age. There were no lights inside, no sign of life. "Come on," Carlos whispered. "We'll enter through the back door." We circled around the chapel, careful to stay low and out of sight from the road below. The back door was small and made of heavy wood with an iron lock. Carlos produced a set of keys from his pocket. "I took these from my father's office," he explained. "He owns this chapel. Remember, he restored it." He tried several keys before finding one that fit. The lock opened with a loud click and the door swung open with a long, drawn-out creak. We slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind us. The interior of the chapel was dark and cold, with the smell of old stone and burned candles. Moonlight streamed through the narrow windows, creating silver pathways across the stone floor. Rows of pews stretched from the entrance to the altar where a large cross hung on the wall. "The altar," Carlos whispered. "That's where the secret chamber is." We moved up the central aisle between the pews toward the altar. Our footsteps echoed softly on the stone floor. When we reached the altar, Carlos knelt down and began feeling the stones beneath it. "There must be a mechanism somewhere," he muttered. "A lever, a loose stone, something to open the chamber." I knelt beside him and started searching as well. We felt along the stones for several minutes looking for anything unusual, any stone that might move or shift. Then my hand touched a small symbol carved into the stone, a heart with a dagger through it. I pressed on it and there was a faint click. A section of the floor in front of the altar slid aside, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "You found it," Carlos whispered, patting my shoulder. "Come on." He switched on his flashlight, the beam illuminating the staircase. It led to a narrow corridor with damp stone walls and a low ceiling. Carlos went first and I followed close behind, my heart pounding in my chest. The corridor led to a small round room. In the flashlight beam I could see that the walls were covered with strange symbols carved into the stone circles, stars, eyes, and hearts. In the center of the room was a stone pedestal, and on the pedestal was something emitting a dull red glow. We approached cautiously and I saw what it was, an exquisite crystal vessel with silver wires wrapped around it. And inside the vessel, floating in a dark red liquid, was a human heart. It wasn't like I had imagined. It wasn't the stylized heart shape we commonly see. This was a real organ, a mass of muscle that contracted slowly and regularly, emitting a dull red glow with each beat. "Elena's heart," Carlos whispered, his voice breaking. "My mother's heart." He stepped forward, reaching out as if to touch the vessel, then stopped. "We have to destroy it," he said, his voice hardening again. "We have to burn it." I took out my lighter. "How do we do that? It's in liquid." "We have to open the vessel," Carlos said. "Take out the heart. Then we can burn it." He reached out again and grasped the vessel. As he did so, the heart inside seemed to beat faster, and the red glow grew stronger. "It knows," Carlos whispered. "It knows we're here." He began twisting the top of the vessel, trying to open it. But it appeared stuck, or perhaps designed not to be opened. "It won't open," he growled after a moment. "We'll have to break it." "If we break it, the liquid will spill out," I pointed out. "The heart will be wet. How can we burn it?" Carlos looked around the room, then back at the vessel. "We'll have to risk it," he said. "There's no other way." He placed the vessel back on the pedestal and pulled out his gun. "Stand back," he said. I stepped back a few paces, my heart racing. Carlos aimed at the vessel, but before he could pull the trigger, a voice rang out from behind us. "Carlos, my son!" We spun around to see a man standing in the doorway of the chamber, tall, thin, with thick gray hair and deep-set eyes. Javier Morales, or rather Javier Mendoza. "Father," Carlos said, his voice cold as the stone beneath our feet. "I wondered when you would find it." Javier said, his voice deep and smooth. "I knew you were searching. I knew you broke into my house, but I didn't think you would find it here." He looked at me. "And you brought a friend, better than you could have imagined." "Stay back," Carlos said, raising the gun to point at his father. "Don't come any closer." Javier smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "You won't shoot me, Carlos. You don't have the courage. You never did." "This time is different," Carlos said, his voice trembling slightly. "I know what you did. To my mother, to the other women, I read her diary, I know everything." "Then you should understand that I did what I had to do," Javier said. "I was old, Carlos. I was dying. I found a way to live, a way to survive. Isn't that what anyone in my position would do?" "You killed my mother," Carlos said, his voice breaking. "You cut out her heart while she was still alive." "She was going to leave us," Javier said, his voice hardening. "She was going to take you away. I couldn't let that happen. I loved you, Carlos. I always loved you. Everything I did for you." "Liar!" Carlos shouted. "You never loved anyone but yourself. You killed my mother because you wanted to live forever, because you were afraid to die." "And isn't that natural?" Javier asked, taking a step forward. "Who doesn't fear death? Who wouldn't want to live forever if they could?" "Enough!" Carlos said, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the small chamber, making me flinch. But Javier didn't fall. He remained standing, smiling. And then I saw why the bullet had struck something he wore around his neck, some kind of amulet, and had been deflected. "You were always a foolish child," Javier said, his voice now devoid of its earlier friendliness. Did you think I wasn't prepared for this moment? Did you think I didn't know you would come? I saw it in the blood. I saw it in the signs. I saw it in the heart." He took another step forward, and Carlos fired again, and again the bullet seemed to have no effect. "I've had 40 years to prepare, son," Javier said. 40 years to learn to grow my power. You can't harm me. No one can." Carlos looked at the gun in his hand, then back at his father, despair written across his face. Then, with a cry of rage, he spun around and fired at the crystal vessel. The vessel shattered red liquid, spraying everywhere. And amidst the shards of crystal and liquid, the heart fell onto the pedestal, still beating, still emitting its dull red glow. "No!" Javier shouted, lunging forward. But Carlos was faster. He snatched up the heart dripping with red liquid and threw it toward me. "Burn it!" he shouted. I caught the heart instinctively. It was warm and heavy in my hands, still beating with a steady rhythm. I fumbled for my lighter, trying to ignite it with trembling fingers. Javier rushed toward me, but Carlos tackled him, sending them both crashing to the floor. They grappled with each other, father and son, in a life-or-death struggle. "Do it!" Carlos yelled. "Burn it!" I finally got the lighter to ignite, and I held the flame beneath the heart. It was wet with the red liquid, and I wasn't sure if it would catch fire. But then something strange happened. The liquid seemed to evaporate under the heat, and the heart began to dry out. And as it dried, it began to burn. The flame started small, just a flicker of orange on the surface, but then it spread, engulfing the entire heart. And as it burned, it emitted a strange light, not the orange of a normal flame, but a deep red, almost purple. "No!" Javier screamed, his voice filled with terror. He shoved Carlos aside and lunged toward me, but it was too late. The heart was burning in my hands, and as it burned, I could feel a change in the air, a change in the world around us. Javier stopped mid-stride, doubling over as if in pain, and when he straightened up, I could see the change. His skin, once taut and almost wrinkle-free, was beginning to sag and wrinkle. His thick gray hair was thinning, falling out in strands. His eyes, once bright and keen, were becoming cloudy. "No," he whispered, his voice now weak and quavering. "Not like this. Not now." He doubled over again, and when he stood up, he was a completely different man. No longer Javier Morales, powerful, wealthy, but an old man of 84, frail and withered with wrinkled skin and cloudy eyes. "What have you done?" he whispered, looking at Carlos. "What have you done to me?" "I freed my mother," Carlos said, "and I ended you." Javier staggered forward, one hand reaching out as if trying to grasp something for balance. But there was nothing to hold on to, and he collapsed to the floor, where he lay motionless, breathing weakly. The heart in my hands had nearly burned away, only ashes remaining. And as the last bit of it turned to ash, I felt a cold wind blow through the chamber, despite there being no windows or openings. And then I heard a voice, soft as a whisper, but clear in my mind. A woman's voice. "Gracias," the voice whispered. "Thank you." Then the voice was gone, and the chamber was silent once more. Carlos knelt beside his father, checking his pulse. "He's still alive," he said, "but weak, very weak." "What should we do?" I asked, still holding the ashes of the heart in my hands. Carlos looked at me, then at his father. "We should leave," he said, "quickly, before someone comes." "What about him?" I asked, nodding toward the old man on the floor. "He'll live or die," Carlos said, his voice hard. "It's not up to us anymore." I nodded, understanding that Carlos had achieved what he wanted, revenge on his father, freedom for his mother's soul. Whether Javier Mendoza lived or died now was irrelevant. "What about the ashes?" I asked, looking at the remains of the heart in my hands. Carlos took out a handkerchief from his pocket. "Put them here," he said. "I know exactly what to do with them." I carefully poured the ashes into the handkerchief, and Carlos wrapped them up carefully, then placed them in his pocket. "Come on," he said. "Let's go, quickly." We left the secret chamber, returning to the chapel above. Outside, the full moon still hung in the sky, casting its silver light over everything. We hurried down the hill, back to our cars, not speaking. There was nothing left to say. When we reached the base of the hill, Carlos turned to me. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to help me, but you did. You helped free my mother." "I don't think I had much choice," I said. "She chose me, didn't she? She led me to the blue house." Carlos nodded. "She chose well," he said. "What will you do with the ashes?" I asked. "I'll scatter them in the blue house," Carlos said, "where she died, where her soul was bound. It's the only way to truly free her." "And you?" I asked. "Where will you go?" Carlos shrugged. "Far away." "I've accomplished what I came back to do. Nothing holds me here anymore." He held out his hand and I shook it. "Goodbye, friend. Live a good life, and never walk on full moon nights again." With that he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing there wondering if all of this had really happened, or if it was just a strange dream, a hallucination, a nightmare. I drove home in a daze, my mind still reeling from the night's events. Had I really helped destroy a 40-year-old beating heart? Had I really watched a man age decades in minutes? Had I really heard Elena's voice thanking me before she finally found peace? It all seemed impossible, fantastical, and yet I knew it was real. The smell of burning flesh still clung to my hands. The image of Javier collapsing, suddenly old and frail, was burned into my mind. The sound of Elena's voice, soft and grateful, echoed in my ears. When I reached my apartment, Blackie greeted me at the door, tail wagging, relieved to see me safe. I hugged him tightly, grateful for his warmth, his normalcy, his uncomplicated love. "It's over, boy," I whispered. "It's over." And for a while I believed it was. The next morning the news broke about Javier Morales' death. "Prominent businessman dies of heart failure," the headlines proclaimed. He had been found in the old chapel on the hill behind Villa del Corazon, where he reportedly often went to meditate. Doctors said he had died of heart failure, nothing unusual for an 84-year-old man. What shocked people, though, was his appearance. In photos taken just a day before, he had looked healthy and vigorous. But when found, he appeared as a frail, elderly man with wrinkled skin and thinning hair. It was as if he had aged 20 years overnight. No one mentioned Carlos. No one mentioned the secret chamber beneath the altar, or the shattered crystal vessel, or the heart that had been burned to ashes. Javier's estate would go to charity since he had no living heirs. I followed the coverage, obsessively half expecting police to show up at my door with questions about my involvement. But no one came. The case was ruled a natural death, and within days the story faded from the headlines, replaced by other news, other tragedies. I returned to work apologizing profusely to my boss for my unexplained absences. He was surprisingly understanding, perhaps because I looked as terrible as I claimed to have felt. The dark circles under my eyes spoke of sleepless nights. My hands still trembled slightly when I handled the cash register. "Just don't make it a habit," Hernandez warned. But there was concern in his eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost." If only he knew. For a while, life seemed to return to normal. The mirrors in my apartment remained free of bloody handprints. I heard no voices calling my name in the night. The presence I had felt watching me from every corner had vanished. Even Blackie relaxed, no longer growling at empty spaces or hiding under the bed. I began to breathe easier, to sleep through the night, to believe that maybe it truly was over. Elena had found peace. Her heart had been destroyed. Her son had scattered her ashes in the blue house, breaking the connection that had bound her spirit to this world. Justice of a sort had been served. But then subtle things began to change. It started with dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but strange, disjointed visions. I would find myself standing in the blue house in front of the door where Elena had died. But when I looked down, I was holding a knife and my hands were covered in blood. I would wake up gasping, clutching at my chest where, in the dream, a hollow cavity had been carved. Then came the reflection. One morning, about 2 weeks after that night in the chapel, I was brushing my teeth when I noticed something strange in the mirror. For just a moment, so brief I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, I saw someone standing behind me, A woman with long, dark hair and hollow eyes, her mouth open in a silent scream. I spun around, heart racing, but my bathroom was empty. Just steam from the shower condensation on the tiles, the hum of the ventilation fan. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except when I turned back to the mirror, I noticed a faint mark on my left wrist, a small reddish discoloration in the shape of a handprint. The same small, feminine hand that had left bloody prints on my mirrors. I scrubbed at it in the shower, but it wouldn't come off. It wasn't a stain on my skin. It was under it like a bruise or a birthmark. By the end of the day, it had faded slightly, and I told myself it was nothing. Stress, lack of sleep, and overactive imagination fueled by trauma. But the next morning it was back slightly darker, and the morning after that darker still. By the end of the week, it looked like a burn red and raw, perfectly outlining a woman's hand. I began wearing long-sleeved shirts, even in the warm weather, to hide the mark. I avoided looking in mirrors for too long. I kept the television on, constantly filling my apartment with noise to drown out any whispers I might hear. Blackie noticed the change in me. He stayed closer than usual, watching me with worried eyes, whimpering softly when I woke up sweating from another dream. He slept pressed against my side every night, as if trying to protect me from something only he could sense. 1 month after the night in the chapel, exactly on the next full moon, I woke suddenly at 1:42 a.m. The digital clock on my nightstand cast a blue glow across my bedroom, illuminating Blackie's sleeping form beside me. Something had awakened me, but I couldn't tell what. The apartment was silent except for Blackie's soft breathing. Then I heard a faint tapping. Not from the window or the door, but from underneath my bed. My blood turned to ice. I lay perfectly still, listening. The tapping continued, gentle, persistent, like someone softly knocking with a knuckle. Blackie woke up, his ears perking forward. He let out a low growl, staring at the edge of the bed. Summoning all my courage, I leaned over and looked beneath the bed. Nothing but darkness, dust, and a few forgotten socks. The tapping stopped. I sat up, heart pounding. Had I imagined it? Was I finally losing my mind after everything I'd experienced? Then my eyes caught a glint of metal on the floor beside my bed. I switched on the lamp and saw it a small key with a spot of red on its head, identical to the one that had slid under the door of the blue house. I scrambled out of bed, backing away from the key as if it might bite. "This isn't happening," I whispered. "This is over." "She's gone." But even as I spoke, I felt a familiar coldness spread through the room. The same chill I'd felt in the secret chamber beneath the chapel when Elena's heart had burned to ash in my hands. Against my better judgment, I bent down and picked up the key. It was cold and heavy in my palm, the spot of red nail polish or blood I still didn't know vibrant against the tarnished metal. As I straightened up, I noticed something else, a wet, sticky sensation on my hand. I turned it over and saw a perfect, bloody handprint there, as if someone had pressed their palm against mine. But it wasn't my blood. The skin beneath was unbroken. Blackie suddenly leaped off the bed, hackles raised, and began barking furiously at my bedroom door. The door I knew I had left open when I went to bed, but which was now firmly closed. And from the other side I heard a soft knocking. It couldn't be. I lived alone. The front door to my apartment was locked and deadbolted. There was no one else here. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Blackie's barking became frantic, mixed with frightened whines, as he backed away from the door, pressing against my legs. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking with fear. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the room, heavier and more oppressive than any sound could be. Then slowly, deliberately, the doorknob began to turn. I stood frozen, the key clutched in my bloody hand as the door swung open to reveal nothing. An empty hallway, dimly lit by the nightlight I kept plugged in near the bathroom. But as I stared into the seemingly empty space, I felt a presence move past me, cold as the grave, carrying the faint scent of decay and something metallic like old blood. It brushed against my cheek like icy fingers, and I heard or perhaps felt a whisper in my ear, "Gracias por tu corazón." Thank you for your heart." In that moment, I understood the terrible truth. When I had destroyed Elena's heart, I hadn't freed her soul. I had simply given it a new vessel, me. I rushed to the bathroom and switched on the light, staring at my reflection in the mirror. For a second, my face flickered, replaced by another gaunt, hollow-eyed mouth open in a silent scream. Elena's face. Then it was gone, leaving only my own terrified reflection. But something had changed. The mark on my wrist had spread red lines extending up my arm like veins converging toward my chest in the unmistakable outline of a heart. I pulled up my shirt and saw it clearly now, a red inflamed scar in the shape of a heart over my own, as if someone had carved it into my flesh with a dull knife. It pulsed with a strange rhythm slightly out of sync with my own heartbeat. 2 beats now. 2 souls. 1 body. I sank to the bathroom floor, the cold tiles grounding me as the world seemed to spin. Blackie crept in cautiously, whimpering, and pressed his warm body against mine in a futile attempt at comfort. "What have I done?" I whispered, though I knew the answer. I had helped destroy the heart that had kept Javier Mendoza alive for 40 years. I had helped free Elena's soul from its binding to the Blue House. But magic demands balance. A vessel for a vessel. A heart for a heart. In burning her heart, I had offered my own as replacement. In freeing her from one prison, I had provided another. My body. My life. As dawn broke, casting pale light through my bathroom window, I made a decision. I would go back to the Blue House. I would find Carlos. I would find a way to end this properly. But as I stood, a wave of dizziness washed over me, and I heard Elena's voice again, clearer now. "Es demasiado tarde. Ahora somos uno." It's too late. Now we are one. I looked in the mirror one last time and saw both of us reflected there, my face, but her eyes looking back at me. Dark, hollow, ancient with suffering. And I knew with terrible certainty that I would never truly be alone again.